Good morning, everyone. On behalf of First National Bank, let me start by saying we couldn't be more proud to sponsor such a wonderful event. When you look around the room, it reminds me of just how engaged this business community is, and we're just so fortunate to have the chamber that truly acts as a catalyst of our local economy and champions our success. And so thank you, Natalie, for your leadership and all that you do. I think we're also fortunate to have Adam Jones available to present to us this morning. I've had the pleasure of listening to Adam a few times, and he does an excellent job of really breaking down the numbers and putting them in layman's terms so we can follow them and understand how we're doing locally. In 2017, First National Bank expanded its footprint into the Carolinas, specifically the Cape Fear region. We are currently at 400 offices over 6 states, 90 of those in the Carolinas, 8 here locally. Now, what attracted us to the Cape Fear region is a lot what you're going to hear Adam talk about in the economic scorecard. The economic growth, opportunity, favorable business climate, etc. So we'll let the experts give you more details on that. Now, for me personally, 2018 was a pretty big year. We saw our oldest graduate high school, go off to college. We fully relocated the family down here to Wilmington, adjusting to all the changes and challenges of moving to a new city bring. And then, of course, like everyone else in the room, got to experience the full wrath of Mother Nature in Hurricane Florence. And for a second, just a brief second, we questioned our decision for moving to the coast. But then, we looked around, and to our joy and amazement, we saw the most wonderful thing. The only thing I can compare it to is the Who's down in Whoville. There was no sobbing, there was no pity, and it was quite the opposite. There was resilience, there was pride, neighbors helping neighbors, compassion, unity like I've never seen before. And so, what I'll tell you is, like FNB, I was attracted to the Cape Fear region for the growth, the opportunity, the beautiful scenery, the ideal climate. But I will stay in Wilmington for the sense of community, that strong sense of community that we all got to experience these last couple months. And really, in my mind, that is the X factor for Wilmington. When we compare ourselves to other communities, and in any walk of life, whether it's competition sports, anything, there's always that X factor, that it factor, which you can't quite explain why somebody is achieving success. And for us, it's that sense of pride, it's that sense of community, of coming together and picking each other up when we go through hard times. And you're not going to see that subjectively, objectively documented in an economic scorecard, but I can tell you it exists. I experienced it firsthand. And so going into 2018, I was excited about coming to Wilmington, coming to the Cape Fear region, and as the year winds down, I can sincerely say I'm proud to call Wilmington home. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to First National Bank for their investment in the chamber, the work that we do, and in the scorecard. And this scorecard doesn't come together very easily. It takes a lot of work by a lot of people. I'd like to first call out on my staff team, Scott Chekleski. He leads the team that works through this alongside Dr. Jones. And then we have a phenomenal team that we work with who actually publishes it for us. In fact, they're so wonderful that they had to make a special trip to the city that it got printed in so that they could drive it here. We got it about 30 minutes before the event, and we were all chewing our nails. I had a bad dream last night, but here it is. It got here. And so I thank those folks who lost some sleep, put some extra miles on a car in order to get this here for us this morning. And I'd also like to especially thank and introduce the chair of the Scorecard Committee, Jason Wheeler with Pathfinder Wealth Consulting. Jason has been a member of the chamber board, he's been on various committees, is a great investor in our organization, and he leads the team that he'll tell you a little bit more about when he comes up as we put this scorecard together. So Jason, I invite you to the stage. There you are.
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank you for being here. Second, I'd like to thank you for your participation. As Natalie mentioned, there are a couple folders in front of you that we're going to be going through in a little bit, and we do really want your voice. I'd like to share a little bit of background on the economic scorecard for those that are new to the scorecard, and as a refresher for those that have seen it before. Cape Fear Future is one of the Chamber's flagship initiatives. It first started in 2006 with the goal of furthering the development of our region's knowledge sector economy to promote economic development and ensure the prosperity of our region. This initiative aims to leverage existing assets in our community where knowledge sector workers would like to live. And so initially this was started in 2006, the Cape Fear Future. The success of the Cape Fear Future is very obvious. And if you don't know everything that this initiative and what really program has done, I encourage you to go to the Chamber's homepage. In the top right corner it says Cape Fear Future. And you can click that and look. There's even a timeline of all the successful items that have been accomplished over the years. One of those is obviously this, the economic scorecard. In 2015, as Natalie mentioned, it was the first time that the Regional Economic Scorecard was printed. The scorecard is an unbiased collection of data that gives us a benchmark comparison against sister cities, and you'll see those cities in a second, as well as a few aspirational cities. You will see a page in the scorecard that represents the economic output of our region, and I encourage you to study that closely. However, the bulk of the scorecard is about inputs, not outputs. It's about giving us a profile of our strengths and weaknesses and how those compare with these other cities. Scorecard is not a chamber marketing effort, although we do look good against a lot of other places. It should be seen really as an internal conversational piece that brings together our private sector and our business leaders, who many of you are here today, as well as our governments and our elected officials who are also here today, to look for ways to continually improve the prosperity of our region. In fact, every year when we form the committee to put the scorecard together, all those constituents are involved. Big business, small business, city, government, county government, elected officials. So it's really a great culmination of folks that come together. All of those folks provide input, they provide contacts to find other content and stuff to bring some of the life to the scorecard each year and highlight some of the things that you'll see as both progress and potential. These conversations are very lively. It's probably one of the most lively conversations I have about the prosperity of our community. The committee does a really good job of seeing things from a lot of different angles, and it's fun. What is really a strength? What is really a weakness? What is this data really telling us? How is this data collected? How is it measured? Thankfully, Dr. Jones can answer most of how it's measured and where it comes from. So we do certainly rely on his team, and I'll be turning it over to him to give you an overview. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about one of the major items when we first formed the committee this year, which was Hurricane Florence. So it has certainly impacted our region, no doubt. And I can say that watching the resilience, watching the perseverance of both our private sector and our governments was nothing short of remarkable. I know there are certainly areas where we fell short, but those are very, very, very small compared to all the great effort that went into not only preparing, but during the hurricane and also the recovery. I'm very tickled to say that I've talked to a lot of business owners, and a lot of them said, well, October's been really good. So I mean, there's been a bounce back that's exciting. But we won't really know the impact of Hurricane Florence on our economic data for years, really, the full impact of this. So I would just encourage you to remember that this year's data is the prior 5 years data, right? It's not 2018's data yet. To give you an idea of the livelihood of the conversation that we had, so I said, wow, there's a lot of people who have come into town. They're doing a lot of great work for us, and I know we appreciate that. However, there's a lot of money going back to Virginia or Ohio or Texas or Alabama, because we're paying for a lot of services. And Paul Lawler, I don't know if Paul's here today, but Paul is on the committee, and he countered a perspective, and he said, we're getting a lot of insurance money. We're also getting some FEMA money coming in. So again, just that little bit of, is money leaving, is money coming in? What's really going on with the impact of Hurricane Florence? And I would just, again, encourage you, we will see that. We'll be able to understand it more. And thankfully, to the Economic Scorecard and Dr. Jones' team who do that for us. Before I turn it over to Dr. Jones, I'd just like to say thank you. Again, as Natalie mentioned, Dr. Jones and his team, we couldn't do it without them. Our committee members who are here, you can see their names on the back page of the scorecard, actually on the back cover of the scorecard. And then again, I would also like to thank Scott personally. This is a published document, and the glue is Scott. So thank you to Scott, our committee members, and Dr. Jones. I'd like to give them all a round of applause, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones at this time.
You guys better watch out. They gave me a mic so I could wander around, which means I'm coming out to greet you all during the discussions. So last weekend, my wife and I were driving down the road, and I was prattling on as usual about economics and what's coming up over the next week. And she paused for a second and she said, "Wait, this is the scorecard event, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You always seem to get excited about this one. Why the scorecard?" I said, "Well, the scorecard is a really unique event because it's not me talking to a crowd. It's you guys talking to each other and talking back to the chamber. This is really a collaborative effort, and that makes it exciting to me. So my job is just to cue up your conversations." All right, so a couple quick comments before we get going. Brad came up here and hit on some points that are really, really important, probably without even realizing, just by telling his story. So it's the opportunities that tend to bring folks to town, but it's Wilmington that keeps them here. That shows up in the studies. So you're always trying to figure out, do people follow the jobs or do jobs follow the people? And the data is starting to point in the direction of people follow the jobs, and then the quality of place and quality of life keep people in those regions. That was his story. And as for where the data came from, Jason said, I wonder where the data comes from. I just asked Natalie what she wants it to say, and then I go write that down. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this process works, where we are, and then we're going to kick it over to you guys for some follow-up. So the point of the scorecard is to try and benchmark Wilmington versus other communities, other peer cities. And the list of potential peers is infinite, but we narrowed it down to the ones that are on the screen in front of you. Myrtle Beach, Asheville, Savannah, Mobile, Roanoke, Chattanooga, and Pensacola. And then I said, all right, we probably want to go farther than just benchmarking against peers and think about who's a little bit farther along in this development process. And the committee zeroed in on Charleston and Raleigh. So when I say we, that was the original committee 4.5, 5 years ago really that this project got started. Hal Kitchen was a major part of that and one of the initial drivers. And we ended up with a set of peer cities. Some folks have asked, is this still an appropriate set of peer cities? Should we change it? And the answer is maybe. But if we're trying to benchmark ourselves, we need to be consistent. So even if maybe you don't like every city that's in that list, the objective is to pick a list, pick a set of metrics, and stick to them, rather than just cherry pick the ones that make us look good. So the objective is to really be consistent over time and see how we've done long-term as well as short-term. All right, so once we've got the peer cities that we're going to compare to, then the story is, all right, what are we actually going to measure and how are we going to benchmark ourselves against them? So as Jason said, this is a story more about inputs than it is the outputs. So we can control part of this process. We can control what goes in. So we focus on 4 areas of inputs. We focus on our human capital, our innovative activity or capacity. We focus on the entrepreneurial environment. So is this an environment that encourages risk-taking and entrepreneurship? And then finally, we look at our quality of place as a way of, are we going to be able to retain the talent once it's here? So the idea is we take all these inputs, we mix them together through an environment for development, which includes infrastructure, it includes our industrial mix, but is really hard to measure. So we focus more on the inputs, they get mixed together in this development process, and then yield the outputs, the outcomes that we're all interested in. So how much gets produced, how much per person, what do wages look like? So it's the outcomes that we're interested in, but how do we change the outcomes? We focus on the inputs, so we measure the inputs. All right, so what's our key takeaway? Where are we eventually going? This is not a joke, so we give our punchline right up front, and then we'll build back to it. So key takeaways, it's been a relatively good year. We've seen some progress in some important areas, and some of the negative trends have at least slowed, if not reversed. So I think the news is good this time around. On the employment side, one of the big concerns last year was that we had lost ground in knowledge and technical employment within the region. That slide has stopped and actually is going in the right direction now. So hopefully we've turned a corner there. That's one of the big drivers of the dials that we'll see a couple times as we go through this. Pay growth, unfortunately, still remains kind of slow in the region. And we'll think briefly about why that might be near the end. Traded sector remained relatively flat and is an area of opportunity for us that we'll talk about more in a few minutes. And the pieces that you're probably involved with every day is that our quality of life here, quality of place, remains strong and is improving. This is driven largely by improvements in the crime rate. Recent weeks maybe withstanding. The numbers for Wilmington, if you go back and you compare the where were we 7 years ago, have been just a dramatic change. We went from an area that folks were a little concerned about to now an area that we really should be proud of. So I think we should all be proud of that, and we should thank our elected officials and our public service folks for helping with that. That's worth it. All right, so our objectives for this morning are to recognize our progress, but more importantly, let's identify our potential. Let's think about where the bottlenecks are. There's a lot of this that we can see in the data, but there's a lot of it that we can't. And that's where we need feedback from you all. So our objective is for me to tee this up, kick it over to you, and you all fill in the details. And then Natalie said she'll solve all those problems over the next year. So I see that's shaking your head, right? Okay, yeah, yes. All right, so getting going, a few notes. As you look at the dials and as you look at the information that's in the scorecard, what should you know to put it in context? So when we think about the Wilmington region, the committee decided that our region is the 3-county area of Brunswick County, New Hanover County, and Pender County. Unfortunately, some of the feds do not agree with that from a statistical standpoint, and they put Brunswick County into Myrtle Beach's statistical area. So there are 2 terms in there. If you see the Wilmington area, that means the data is for the 3-county region. If you see Wilmington MSA, that means it's for New Hanover and Pender, and that's the only way the data was available. Where possible, we tried to build on the 3-county area. So the feds, in their infinite wisdom, decided to move Brunswick out in 2010. They have updated their metropolitan areas in September and left Brunswick County in Myrtle Beach. So that was not only surprising to me, but also a little disappointing because it makes it harder for us to get our arms around what's really going on in our functional region, right? What we would consider Wilmington. the folks in Leland are not Myrtle Beach residents. They're Wilmington residents. All right, the numbers in the scorecard are indices. Our objective is to try and scale these so that we can easily look at them and see how we're doing. So what the indice is it's taking our regional performance and scaling it to the nations. So if the number is 110, that means we're doing 10% better than the nation in that area. With probably 2 caveats. So the crime rate and the commute times have been inverted. So if you look at the crime rate and you go, whoa, that number is really high, that's actually good. We need to make them all comparable so they fit together. So it's titled crime rate, but think of it really as safety factor. And when you see commute times, that index is really commute efficiency, if you want to think about it that way, right? A higher number there on that index is good for us. We just inverted them. All right, and the last piece is thinking about this data. So Jason pointed this out, that this is annual data. It is slightly lagged as we wait, so we don't have 2018 data yet, for obvious reasons. But we use the most recent estimates that we can get. So there are pros and cons to this. The advantages are we have the most recent data available. The disadvantage is that it's potentially subject to revisions in the future, and sometimes there are errors in some of the preliminary estimates. So for example, the regional output numbers from 2016 were substantially revised this year. We went from an initial output release of saying that we grew at 3.2% to a revised estimate of saying we shrank by a little over 0.5%. That's a big swing. So the initial numbers came out and said, hey, it was a good year, you should pat yourself on the back. The new revised numbers came out and says, oh yeah, well, you were actually in recession. And next year, my guess is they'll come back and say, no, it was a good year, just not quite as good as they thought in the first one. So beware, there are some potential revisions coming in the future to these numbers. All right, so how are we going to structure and work our way through this? So if we think about these competitive inputs, we've measured those. It's this middle area that's a little bit softer and harder to get our arms around. How do you measure social, cultural, and institutional environment? That's really hard to do, right? You know when you're in a place that feels good, has a good, vibrant culture, but that's not as easy to measure. So we're going to ask you guys to do that today. The Chamber has said we want to think about and focus on the takeaways from last year's scorecard. Those takeaways were mostly labor market focused. We said, all right, let's come back and build on that this year and focus a little bit on this middle part of the pyramid. So we're going to get some feedback from you. So what we've done is we've taken the scorecard and we've broken it up to think about labor markets. So with the help of Lisa from Leith HR, who I saw her here somewhere, there she is hanging out over here. She said, well, let's think about this in the context of sort of the 3 parts of going through your HR process, right? You've got to attract talent, you've got to select the right people, and then you've got to keep them. So that's going to be our process for this morning. We're going to think first about attracting talent. We're going to think about, well, have we attracted talent? How do we stand on that? How are we doing on human capital? And then we'll move into selecting talent. So this becomes a story about getting the right folks in the right seat, right? Supporting our entrepreneurs and helping them grow, helping them expand beyond local businesses, potentially in the traded sector businesses. And then finally, we'll think about how do we retain talent. And you retain talent by engaging it. There's more to work than just pay, right? It's creating an atmosphere where folks are engaged and they get to participate in innovative activities and have a good quality place where they can live. So here's an interesting way to think about that. And this is one that economists are really struggling with right now. There are a lot of people that do a lot of work for free. You ever gone on Wikipedia? You use Firefox? All that stuff's getting generated and nobody's paying those folks. So as economists, we look at our models, we say, wait, that shouldn't work. Nobody should do anything for free, right? It's all about paid and incentives. But clearly there's more to it than that. It's about helping folks feel engaged, and they want to feel as though they're contributing and they're willing to put a lot of time in for free, which is part of this story about how do we retain talent. We make sure that we have an innovative area that they can engage in and be a part of. All right, so getting rolling with our first section, we're going to think about attracting talent and how have we done. So this is measured with our human capital index. And how have we done? The answer is pretty well. And when we look at this human capital index, it's true with a bunch of them, you're going to see kind of mixed results. So if we look at how have we done over the last year, that's on the dials, you see the big black line for where we are, right, on how we're performing. And then next to it will be whether or not we've gained or lost ground over the last year. And then down at the bottom of the dial, you can see the trend since 2010. And this is where we see the mixed results. So the last year, we made some improvements, but we're still down a little bit on 2010. So how do we square those two together? And there's a theme that'll come up over and over, and that's that over the last couple of years, we lost some ground in knowledge and technical employment in the region. We'll see in just a second that's what drives this result since 2010 is that we lost ground, and that's what drives some of the other results later on. The good news is that that trend is reversing. So if we look at the components of the dial, we've got knowledge workers on the left-hand side, and you can see that from 7 years ago, we lost quite a bit of ground. Over the last 4 years, we lost ground not just in relative terms, but in absolute terms. So if you look at the number of folks that were employed in jobs that required knowledge, skills, higher education essentially, and in technical positions, those numbers had been declining. This year, we've flipped around. Those numbers have started to increase. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we've turned a corner. All right, what about the other components? High school graduates and college graduates, we're doing fairly well there. And then the last one is the employment rate. The employment rate in the last couple of years hasn't been such a big story because the economy is doing pretty well. Where the gaps really blow out on that is during recessions, but right now it's a pretty tight grouping. So that tends to stay fairly constant in our sample period. But where we run up a little bit short is trying to think about the details and where the opportunities are, because it just doesn't show up in the data. So that's where we need some help from you. So I thought, let's frame this discussion by thinking about the current state of the labor market. So even after the hurricane, even after all the disruptions, the unemployment rate in the region is 3.7%. That's amazing. It's also a little concerning if you're looking for talent, right? The labor market's getting tight. So where is it the tightest? Now, bear with me and hold on. There is a lot in this chart, and there's even more in your minds. So let me set up this chart first, and then we'll get some feedback from you. So on the vertical axis is an occupation's, the number of openings for an occupation as a percentage of total openings in the region. So the higher up an occupation is on that vertical axis, the more folks they're looking for, right? That's all that's saying. On the horizontal axis is percentage of employment. So the farther to the right an occupation is, the larger the piece of the community that occupation is. Which means, if you're in sort of the upper left corner, imagine you drew a diagonal through that chart. If you're above that line, that means that you have more openings than your proportion of employment. So if you could fill those openings, that sector, that occupation would be growing. Right? So if there was somebody in the upper left-hand corner, that would mean that they're a relatively small part of the economy, but they're trying to hire a whole bunch of people. So the farther sort of up and to the left they are, the higher growth potential that occupation has if they can fill their openings, and the farther down and to the right, the lower the growth potential. Whew, that's a lot to try and get. And we haven't even talked about the colors yet. or the size of the dots. So what we did to try and think about the current state of the labor market and the anecdotal evidence that we're hearing from some industries that say, well, there are people out there, I just can't find the right people. I can't find the folks I'm looking for, is to try and look at mismatches in the labor market. So we took the state's data on candidates by occupation and compared it to the state's data on openings. And what the colors represent is the number of candidates per opening. So think green is good, lots of candidates per opening. So the green dots represent more candidates per opening than average. And the red dots represent less candidates per opening than average. So that means the red dots are the occupations that are having a harder time finding folks. And the size of the dot represents how tight that market is. So the larger the dot, the bigger the mismatch. So that's a long way of saying what we did is tweak this until when you look at it, the big red dots dump out at you. And you go, oh, health practitioners, that's where one of the problems is. Right? We want to sort of guide you to where the issues are. So we look at health practitioners, big red dot means a fair amount of openings, not very many candidates. Buried down in sort of the middle grouping, you see another big red dot, health support. Again, number of openings, few candidates. And what we need to know from you all, and what the chamber wants, is to try and figure out how do we address these issues. What's missing from the candidates? Is it an experience mismatch? Is it a difference in their training versus what folks are looking for? So we want to know, not just for health obviously, right? We want to know for all industries, where are these mismatches? And then the chamber's team and their board will work to try and figure out how do we address them. All right, so it's your turn. At your table, you should have some envelopes. The blue one is the first one. So if you would, open it. The top piece, there are a couple of questions for you to answer individually. And then at the bottom are a couple of questions we want your table to discuss. So each table should have a facilitator that is going to just ask you questions constantly. Their favorite questions are probably why, and can you tell me more? If you do not have a facilitator at your table, will somebody please write down what the table says and ask the questions why and can you tell me more? And then we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes. This is really cool. So I told you I was talking to my wife and all excited about coming to this event. My perspective from up here is completely different than in my classes. So when I go back to my groups and classes and say, all right, we're going to get rolling again, everybody clicks off Facebook on their phone and puts it back in their pocket. You all were actually working productively, which is why this is such an exciting event to be a part of. All right, so one batch down. We've thought about attracting talent and where some of the difficulties are. The next piece becomes, how do we actually select the right folks to support our entrepreneurs? So let's start that discussion by thinking about what does our entrepreneurial environment look like? And it's a relatively strong one here, but with some opportunities there as well. So thinking about the entrepreneurial environment, we score much better on this scale than our peer cities do. But it's from, well, let's just look at the individual pieces and you'll get a feel for why I'm pausing and hesitating. So there are 4 components of this index. And we score really well on 2 of them, and we struggle on 2 of them. So overall, we're doing well, but that's driven largely by the fact that we have a lot of entrepreneurial folks in the community. We have a lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses. These are folks that have shown they're willing to step out, take a risk, and go out on their own and potentially bring some other folks with them. Where we struggle a little bit is that we don't have as many of the large businesses here. The problem with not having as many medium and large-sized businesses is that that doesn't provide enough demand to support the business service industry. Right? So that's the far right-hand side in the area where we probably struggle most and have lost ground over the last couple of years. So coming out of the recession, we saw business services employment spike up, and then over the last couple of years, it's been tailing off. And there are 2 potential reasons for this. Right? It could be that we just don't have enough firms that are interested in selling their services to other companies. So this would be lawyers, accountants, marketing teams, etc. So it could be a supply side problem. Or if we look at this, the left-hand side where we see we have a lot of small businesses, it might be more of a demand side problem. So the real large companies are going to handle a lot of these functions in-house with their own teams. The real small companies are going to handle a lot of these functions in-house by necessity. Right? When you first start out, you keep your own books on a piece of paper or the back of a napkin, and you just kind of piece it together. But as companies grow into those medium-sized firms, then they can start to afford to hand off these service tasks to folks that are experts and focus on their core business. So our issue is, how do we get folks from this left-hand side or the small businesses up to the point where they can support the right-hand side of the business services, and we develop a sustainable business support infrastructure network. Right? We've got to get more business services. And that's where I think there's some good news. So if we look at the proprietor's income share, it's been increasing over the last 1.5, 2 years. This is where the good news is, right? Who takes it the hardest during the bad times? The owner. Who gets the rewards during the good times? The owner. So as we're moving in that direction, proprietor income is increasing, which leads hiring more folks, outsourcing some of these service requests, and growth. So I think that's the positive sign here, is that there's opportunity in front of us. So what are we hoping to see with time? We're hoping to see that some of these small and mid-sized businesses find the right folks to support their efforts, and they can expand and move into what we might refer to as the traded sector. So when we think about companies that are really killing it here in Wilmington, Live Oak, Encino, these names come up all the time. But there's some others that are really killing it too that don't get as much attention. Biddy and Bose is a great example of this. Right? What's awesome about Biddy and Bose? We think about them as doing great things in the community for marginalized workers. But put a business spin on that for a second. They went out and they said, where is there an underutilized resource? How do we put that resource to work? When they figured out how to do it here in Wilmington, now they're expanding outward. Right? They're going from a local coffee shop to becoming a traded sector business where they're starting to push out. SIS Digital is out there bringing new tools to old games. So how do you help promote communities and subdivisions? Well, let's do it from a 3D perspective. Let's bring virtual reality to this. Let's disrupt an old stale photography market with new tools. UNCW is evolving. We're quickly learning how, well, maybe not quickly, but we are learning how to play in an evolving education landscape. So higher education is changing, right? Online education is disrupting it. There's movement towards more and more certificate programs and certifications, and what does the future look like? Is it 4-year degrees? Is it higher education? We're learning how to play in that game too. And as we're learning how to play in that game, we're expanding outward. Our online programs are being sold to folks around the world. The Cameron Business School's new Masters of Science in Finance is targeted at students that want to pass the CFA exam and obtain their CFA certification. We anticipate that a lot of those students will come from overseas. We're figuring out how to trade our services. So, how is Wilmington doing on the traded sector? What is the traded sector? So think of the traded sector as goods that are made in one location and then traded across regions, as compared to the local sector, where goods are produced and consumed in one spot. So French fries produced at McDonald's, consumed within a mile radius, right? That's very much a local sector. Versus a traded sector is a good that's going to be made in one spot and then sold all around the country or all around the world. So automobiles, for example, you can tell me where the major manufacturing plants are, right? They're making them in one spot, selling them all over. And this is an area where Wilmington struggles a little bit. So why do we struggle here? Well, part of it is geography. In fact, a fair amount of it might be that the coastal towns naturally lend themselves to more of these local sector businesses. The other reason is probably a measurement error. So there are some businesses, or a fair number of them here in the community, that get counted as local, that really also have a traded component to them. So restaurants, for example, are thought of as local because they're serving a local constituency. But here in Wilmington, a lot of their patrons they're serving are from out of town. So there's some measurement issue here. But that's not enough to say, oh, hey, this isn't a concern. This is an issue, right? And what's driving it is that we've got these small businesses that we need to help get the right folks on the bus, expand, so that they can start selling out to the rest of the country. All right, and that's where we need your help. So, your turn. Open the pink envelope. And we want to know, where are you struggling in terms of selecting talent, and what can the chamber do to help support your efforts there? So I know you all are hard at work, but we got to keep rolling. We've got one more critical piece of this puzzle to think about. So if you would, last comments on the sheets, put them back in the red envelopes. So we've thought about how to attract talent. You've thought about selecting talent. The conversation at our table was that the third part might be the key piece, and that's retaining it. So once you've got the right folks, you bring them in, then you've got to actually keep them long enough for this investment to pay off. So how's the community doing on the side that can help with that? And then what can you do as firms? So on the community level side, if we're trying to attract and bring in and then retain creative people who are engaging and innovative, they're going to want to be around other folks that are creative, engaging, and innovative. So the innovative culture in Wilmington is growing once again. We slid for a couple of years, as we can see by our loss since 2010, but back to this story about knowledge workers and technical workers, that trend is reversing. So this was driven largely by a loss in employment and technical positions, and unfortunately, when we compare the 2010, we picked a year that was a heck of a year on the innovation side, because if we look at the grant funding piece of this, there was a single $20 million grant that came into Wilmington that year. So that makes that year look really, really good. So if you look at the change over 7 years, you go, oh my gosh, we're losing out on funding and bringing in money to fund creative, cool stuff. We just happen to compare to our best year ever. So don't sweat that one so much. Why I think this is really positive is that we see the turnaround happening in employment and technical positions. These creative folks are coming in, they'll bring other talent with them. And also on the science-related graduate students. We're starting to generate more talent in Wilmington. we're catching up. These programs are starting to roll. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that at a community level, this creative class, if you will, is starting to build. At the individual firm level, in the closer look section of the scorecard, the committee chose to focus on New Hanover Regional Medical Center's innovation program. So what the system did is it said, wait a minute, we need a lot of these people too, and we need to modernize some of our processes. Let's put all of this together and let it play well with each other. So they're trying to figure out how do they modernize their processes. Oh, well, we should ask folks within our company about how they can bring innovation in, and then use this innovation boot camp and this innovation center to drive their reputation to attract more talented and innovative people. They're keying in on this idea that it's about more than just wages, right? It's about feeling engaged at work. And then the other piece, once folks leave the office, once they go home, you guys know this is a great town to live in. That's why we live here, right? So this is the index where we're continuing to improve, and we've been improving since 2010. This is a great place to live. It's becoming an even better place. So our recent improvements are driven mostly by improvements in the crime rate. So it looks like it jumped a lot over the last year. That's actually really not quite true. It's a 2-year period that's taken place over. But rather than, never mind. It's just, I showed it as 1 year, but it's really over 2 years. Nevertheless, this is still a very, very impressive turnaround for the region in terms of our crime rate. This is now a great place to live, a safe place to live. We can proudly tell our candidates that when they're here visiting. Rush hour travel times. So if you look at our change over the last year, it shows as a -0, meaning that it essentially stayed the same in relative terms. So if you look at commute times, they have lengthened out slightly. So did everybody else's. So if we think about ourselves compared to the nation, we're in the same spot, but our commute times have gotten a little bit longer. So how do you square this statistic while you're sitting in traffic? Everybody else is sitting in traffic too. Now, if we think about this going forward, buckle up. It's going to be an interesting decade. So what I did, and it's kind of hard to see, which is fine, what I want you to see is, man, there's a lot of stuff thrown on that map. These are DOT's projects that I could find in about 5 minutes putting this together, which means there are a million more. I didn't even think about the medians and all the other stuff they're going to do. These are just the major bridge projects and road extensions that are coming in the next 10 years. This town's going to be covered in dump trucks. Our commute times might get a little bit longer, but think of it as us investing in our quality of life, right? How do we maintain quality commute times and make this a great place to live? We're going to have to invest some of our time in the rerouting around the construction projects. So a bright future going forward for us. All right, so our questions for you in the third envelope, the sort of purplish ones, is thinking about retention. So now that you've selected them, now that you've brought them in, what we want to know from you is what are you doing well when it comes to retention, and what's your biggest hurdle? So now that the discussions are just getting rolling, it's time to start thinking about wrapping this up. So we started out with Jason introducing the purpose of the scorecard is to see how we're doing compared to others, but not have a marketing piece. But we do look pretty good. So how do our outcomes look? The answer is that our outcomes look very good except for in one spot. So gross regional product, we score very well. Product per capita, we score well. Employment growth, we score well. Per capita income, which includes non-wage income. So retirees partially driving this. We score very well. Where we struggle a little bit is on the average annual pay growth side. So if we think about what drives communities, education levels and the traditional measures drive economic growth and employment growth. What drives productivity, which is highly correlated with wages, is social capital. So what that means is we need to get more folks involved in groups like this, which is a perfect time to invite your chamber president, Natalie, up.
Somebody tried to challenge me yesterday that they were going to take over my title as head community cheerleader. That makes me laugh when somebody tries to challenge me on that. So first I want to respond to some of Adam's challenges or assumptions about me and the chamber. The chamber will facilitate our problem solving. We can't do it without you and the rest of our members and others, elected and government leaders. We need you all at the table. Another thing that he referenced had to do with Brunswick County. They do not belong in the Myrtle Beach MSA. It's on our public policy agenda. We will be working really hard between now and through the 2020 census to get them back. They belong here. He talked about the crime rate. You guys, I don't get to take credit for this personally because I hadn't moved here yet, but your Chamber of Commerce did a lot of work making sure that the data that was being shared publicly via various news outlets around the world, honestly, about us were accurate, which helped to shine the light on a better crime rate than we thought we had, but then also to truly dive into it, and we continue to make improvements. And again, as Adam said, thanks to our government elected leaders for that. Adam talked about transportation, and he showed you a map that looked a little bit busy. We had the opportunity to, through BASE and their annual business meeting a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, to see the real map. Y'all, there are going to be a lot of orange barrels. For about 2 to 5 years, you're going to hate driving. You think you do today, but trust me, it is short-term pain for some great gain. You're going to start to see much better ability to get around in our community. And so I beg you to share that with your friends and neighbors, that it is going to be painful, but it's going to be so worth it. Thank you for your time today, your work today. And the work that we will ask other chamber members and other businesses in the community to do in the coming days and weeks will inform the work of your chamber. I invite you to serve in that work as we figure out what it looks like. This event, we focused on talent and workforce because last year you told us that's what you needed us to focus on. So we actually started out thinking in 2019 we were going to partner with New Hanover County and Cape Fear Community College to work with you all to create apprenticeship programs. We thought that was the answer, right, Chris? Where's Chris? I know he's here. I saw him. We were going to do that. We were going to do that with them. And you guys didn't respond. And so we don't know then if we had the wrong answer, but we know we needed more information. So you started giving us more information today, but we need to continue those conversations. Your local government, state government, and federal government partners want to help you solve that challenge. I know you don't believe it, but they want to put money to help alleviate the risk that you may have in developing talent to do the work that you need them to do. Listen to them, tell them what the risks are and how they can help, and take advantage of their offer. They're serious about this, and I want to help you get those answers and make that happen. Sorry, catching up on my notes. I get excited. If you want to be a part of also the Scorecard Committee, you heard Adam reference them. He mentioned some of the names. Jason mentioned some of the names. We do have a lot of fun looking through the data, but it really is even more informed as we've expanded that committee and added people who have specific knowledge about various parts of it. It really has made it such a rich and robust conversation. You don't only have to join the Scorecard Committee. We have a lot of other opportunities to engage you in the work of the Chamber that is the work to make your community better. Our vision, we promote prosperity by encouraging business growth. That's what we're about. We want you to help us to do that. I want to thank our sponsors, and of course I didn't bring them up here, so I hope they'll be back up on the screen again. So I'm not even going to try to start listing them except for our presenting sponsor, First National Bank. Thank you, team, for that. I want to thank our facilitators. We had folks sign up somewhat last minute to help us facilitate your conversations, and some of them are Leadership Wilmington participants this year. Some of them come from some other places, UNC Wilmington and others. I want to thank them. I want to thank the committee. I also want to thank my staff, Scott Cheklevsky, who 4 years in a row now has led us through the development of the scorecard and this event. Sue Meyer, who without her effort, this wouldn't have been as successful with the sponsorships and the ticket sales. And then Lexi and Lauren, Lexi Alston, who helped plan the experience that you're having today. Laura McAllister, our new Director of Finance and Operations. They will be outside when you leave with your parking vouchers, so say thank you to them. And I also want to just, as we close, I want to reflect on this fall for me. I told Charlie Maddox, the chair of our foundation board, before the event started, that I'm really ready to turn the page on 2018 and start 2019. It's not because I don't still love my job, and thank you all for letting me to be in this job, letting me do the work that I get to do with you all to make this a better community. But this has been a hard year. We've had a lot of transition inside the chamber, and then Mother Nature, as Brad said, took over. And so I know that this fall has been compressed for all of us. We lost, depending on who you were and where you were, you lost 3 to 6 weeks this fall. And so all of us who do this for you, we piled event after event after event on top of your calendars, trying to get it all in right before the end of the year. So I thank you for taking the time to be here today. It means a lot to me. And then finally, before I close, I just want to say, as you spend your day today and reflect on leadership, today's a National Day of Mourning for President George Herbert Walker Bush. And I don't know a more gentle, thoughtful leader that I've ever witnessed in my life. And no matter how you feel politically, I just think that as we go about our day today, joining in a little bit of that national mourning, learning a little bit about who he was and how he led our country throughout his entire life, I would encourage you to do that. I hope you have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.